Jonathan Sharrock in this morning to do a session on cyber security. Wasn't a topic that was even on my radar until I was sort of, got really into the thick of the planning, and it was Clayton,
yeah.
Cobblestone, who you've met, who put me on to Jonathan, and it made sense considering all of you from memory, and I don't know why you wouldn't be, will be online in some way, shape or form. And so obviously there's quite a bit you perhaps need to think about, which you won't have thought about already, I can almost guarantee that, in terms of keeping everything safe. So I will hand over to Jonathan for an area I know absolutely nothing about. So these guys probably know more about it than I do.
Probably know some stuff. And by all means, ask questions as we go along or at the end. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Cyber Citadel. We're based out of New Zealand and Australia. We have people in the Middle East and the UK and in the US. We're at the sort of the end of cybersecurity where we do a lot of awareness training to try and help you out to make sure that you understand a lot of the cybersecurity risks. So we do a lot of training. We've got the guys that go into organisations either to do a thing called penetration testing, where we go ahead and the company will engage us they'll give us their application. So if you've got a new website that you've launched and you've got a whole lot of customers that are connecting to it, and you're suddenly worried about, well, what happens if someone hacks this website? Or what about if somebody gets access to my customer base? Or let's say, for example, if it's a shopping type cart, someone could actually modify the discount. So you've suddenly sold 1,000 items at 99% discount, which could destroy your business at some point. So what we do is we go and run all those scenarios through the testing. So we would take a website, let's say it's a Shopify type of website, and we will try and break it. We go through the business logic, we go through everything, and we try and make sure that we can test. Basically, we do what the hackers are going to do, and we get as much as we can out in the time that we have. Testing can take anything from 5 to 10 to 15 days. With some clients it's ongoing, but what we do is we give you a report to show you how we did it. So if we break your website, we get the 99% discount. We manage to represent, when you go to these petrol stations, they give you 10 cents off, 50 cents off. Or what about if I can manage to get $2 off? Unless the people that are building and writing the software are making sure that you can't do that, maybe that test case is possible, and this is when your business that could be going extremely well might have a bit of a hiccup or a speed bump. Okay, there is a table of contents. This is just stuff that I'll go through. We don't really have to keep exactly on that. I'm just going to explain a bit about white hat hackers, what they are. I think I've pretty much just done that. Protecting your data. I'll give you two scenarios of something that's happened in the last few weeks, sort of real life examples of people that have had things that have affected their business or their day, sort of stop them doing what they normally do. Why you will be targeted, which I think is quite important, because a lot of people I've presented to over the years have said, look, it doesn't really apply to me, or I'm not of any interest because I'm only a small website. Well, they don't know that when they go about, they have these scripts and things that they run that could potentially hit thousands or hundreds of thousands of computers, and you might just be one of the victims. So there's some things that you can do up front to stop that happening and to give yourself more of a level playing field. Sony and Kaseya, I like Sony because it goes way back in time, and it shows you the effect of what happened years later. Kaseya would have hit a lot of the New Zealand schools last year. It was all over the news. I don't know if you guys were affected by it, but it affected a lot of the school computer systems last year, and systems were down.
We were lucky enough not to, but we're so good as schools.
Yeah, so I'll explain what's the cause of something like that. Phishing and business email compromise. I think my scenario 2 that I'll add, scenario B, will be a business email compromise. You probably know business email compromise for you guys. Someone sends you an email saying that you've won something, or you click on a link. What happens when you click on the link? Because just clicking on the link might be enough to lead to everything that you've built being compromised or sort of stop you doing what you're trying to do, which is making money and grow your business. And ransomware, I'll give you a little bit of a background on ransomware and how successful that's becoming and what you can do to help prevent that. I won't bother with what does Cyber Citadel do in the right at hacking, but yeah, we've got the guys that are, it's a pretty skilled area. I don't know if you've ever had a go at ethical hacking or trying to break into computer systems or follow some of those YouTube tutorials. You can do some damage if you know what you're doing, and there's a lot of free information that's out there. I mean, even with gaming, right? If you're on a PlayStation or an Xbox and you want to knock off your competitor, you know, you just log into and you Google things like distributed denial of service, and you overwhelm your competitor or your friend or whatever it happens to be with so much traffic that they can't stay on the game or join the game or even have a competitive chance in the game. So that's distributed denial of service. Unfortunately, businesses get hit by that. It could be the first day of a competitor's sale, or there could be an event that something is going in the media and they don't want that to take place. So the media organisation gets hit quite hard with a distributed denial of service attack. That's called a DDoS attack. And what that means is you just knock the system offline for a period of time. Could be 20 minutes, could be 2 hours, could be days. The New Zealand Stock Exchange got hit with that, as you probably saw. It would have hit the news. So protecting data, stuff that you can, well, first of all, what is a vulnerability? When systems are built, when you update you've got Windows and Mac computers here from what I can see, when these systems are built, when the software is created, there are flaws. It could be in the toolkits that they use, or it could just be in the people that are developing it, whether they may have interpreted something incorrectly, or they built something at the time that they thought was the way to do it, and then suddenly it doesn't pass certain testing. So, and what happens is, a vulnerability is something that you would potentially want to patch. And patching is, a good way to patch stuff is to keep the systems up to date. So when you're going onto your Apple computer and it's saying, we've got some updates for you, I can't recommend enough update your systems and keep them up to date. We noticed that we're seeing that within 15 minutes of a vulnerability being released, and we find stuff when we do testing, and we submit them to a place where it puts them on the in like a database. It's called, you know, it's with a number, and as soon as we describe what it is, the attackers are going to try and use that to their advantage. In a lot of cases, when we find stuff, we give the vendor, so Apple and software companies, 90 days to fix it, or 60 days, depending how long. Like, it's called responsible disclosure. We have a dialogue with them, and then they fix it. Some people don't. If you've got something you bought on, I'm not saying Alibaba, but you've got access to something overseas, it was incredibly cheap. You might think it's a good deal at the time, but you might not get the updates that you need later on if you want to use that for a longer period of time. So for example, Cyber Citadel, if you went into Google, if you type Cyber Citadel Apple, the year before last, the Apple update that you did was because of some of the stuff that we found during some of our testing. So we've got stuff at Microsoft, Apple, all over the place. Yeah.
Does that include phones as well, or just laptops?
Yeah, so we test phones. Phones are a totally different skill set. So when you're testing a mobile phone, so keeping your phones up to date, absolutely. That's quite important. Right up until recently, what used to happen is the phone manufacturer would produce some hardware, get as much as he can out of it, and there's a whole lot of the vendors that are guilty of this, and then they sort of don't keep you on the upgrade train, so they kind of drop you off as soon as they can, because it costs money to maintain these current versions and fix stuff. So what they do is you find a cheap phone down at a cheap phone store that's a few years old. You've got to make sure you're still getting updates. And what Google did is they said, look, we're going to take some of that back over and try and provide updates for anyone that's on the Android system. But you will find that when you're buying stuff, there's a thing called end of life. At some point, the vendor, Microsoft, Apple, it could be a lot of companies, Cisco, there's most companies, they'll say end of life, and that's how much time you've got left before you're going to not receive any more updates that they're going to commit to. occasionally if it's a really bad situation, they will release stuff, but they're not really kind of looking after you at that point. But Apple's a very good example of they support a lot of the older phones. So you've got a pretty good one. And some of the Android hardware is great as well. It just depends on how old and I think the key thing is keeping it up to date, right? So if there's a flaw that's found, someone 15 minutes later is trying to get access to it. But if you keep your phone up to date, it may be that 60 or 90-day window, they provide the patch, and you're updating it within the 15 days, and it's already patched before the bad guys get a hold of it.
Can I ask a question in my ignorance? When you're doing your testing, is it just on their websites or is it apps as well?
So the testing, first of all, there's the web applications. So your websites, we test those. We test the network infrastructure. So we get inside the network and we try and pivot around. We try and live off the land. We try and get access to a system that, say maybe someone came back off holiday from Fiji and they've just joined the network, and if we're sitting there, maybe if they haven't updated it, we'll jump on it and use that as a pivot point, so we can pivot to something else. And we try and hide somewhere, so that we call back. We're looking for persistent access. So it could be an out-of-date printer sitting on the network that we end up, because the printer might be running something like Linux or an operating system that maybe it's an old printer and no one even thought to update it. Video conferencing systems, we can hide in them in there as well. And we want persistent access, so we want to be able to come back at any time. From a testing point of view, it's a fixed amount of time. So let's say 14 days later, the customer gets the report, he fixes it, and he comes back to us and says, can you retest this, please? And we say, yes, it's been patched. That's important because without that knowledge, you don't know what the capabilities are of the bad guys that might potentially bring these systems down. And the other problem you've got is you need specialised people. They may not be a software developer. They understand software development, but they think like the adversary. So they can get inside stuff and then grab something, like they might be able to grab a key out of memory, or something's left that's unencrypted somewhere, and that's just a starting point. People get lazy. They build software applications, and they haven't even built the bit where you can authenticate and connect to the servers. So what they do is they hard code some credentials in the software just to get that part working, so that they can move on to the next part of the application, and they leave the keys behind. So we come past and we find some hard-coded keys, and we think this is great because, you know, on to the next level, and that's normally what happens. So we do mobile application testing, and we do so iPhone, Android, and we also do API testing, which is for those of you who might not have seen an API. API is an application programming interface, and it's, think of it as something like if you wanted to build a website as Westlake, as you say, okay, I want to have track and trace for all of the students' packages that arrive at school, and I want to do it from our website. You could have an API to New Zealand Post, DHL, and all the couriers that you use, and just have one interface, and the API would do the question. You know, I've got a tracking number. How's my package? And it will respond, and you can ask certain questions to the tracking number and to the API interface. A good example of an API interface that we tested, that we took advantage of. So it's getting information that doesn't belong to you is what we're trying to do. A good example is we had a trucking company in the US, and the only thing we needed to do for the client, the only thing the client thought was happening was the truck had to be registered. So you would type in the VIN number, so the registration number of the vehicle, and it would just come back with a yes/no answer from the Department of Motor Vehicles, or whatever the equivalent is in the US. And we're just looking for a yes/no, is it registered? But what we've got back when the guys were doing testing is we got back the mileage, the owner, the address, and everything else. So from a testing point of view, that needs to be fixed. So we will say that sensitive data exposure, or we've got access to something that doesn't belong to us, and we'll tell them how. We would say as part of testing how you fix it. Encrypting is a big part of it. When you encrypt your customer's data, that's a really big part of giving you sort of encryption is important, but the key management's important. So I don't know if you're into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all the other things that are going on, but imagine if you lost private key, right? That would be bad news. So imagine if the bad guys found your private key on something that you're encrypting. Well, that's bad news because the private key means that you can decrypt everything and get access to that data again. So encryption is very important. Key management, making sure that keys are not available, is also. A scenario A was a judge in Europe. He loses his laptop while he's on holiday, and it's containing sensitive information. So what we noticed was the victims were at risk. There was obviously, because you're flying around and you're not always having access to the internet, and you've got documents that you're working on. That's bad news. Having said that, the policy of the organisation that set it up was to encrypt the laptop. So they just basically said they can just blow the laptop off, basically. There's no keys available. So although you could give the hard disk to some forensic people, the data is worthless. So in that situation, get a new laptop, you enroll the new laptop, so when you log in again, you enroll the laptop back into the company, and it gets rebuilt. So there's a really good case for encrypting your data. If you're building your own businesses, just do that. When you get your new computers, just make sure everything's encrypted. And Office 365 and the Microsoft environment, if that's where you end up, or Google, you've got options for just turning that on and making that available. Someone loses the computer because they're out on a Friday night and accidentally stole their bags, you delete that machine and it's gone. Okay.
So something to think about as you perhaps, at the moment most of us are sole traders, a couple of partnerships, but as you start to build your businesses and you get employees, you know, what hardware are you giving them, how's that connected to your server?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one thing that, have you guys experienced using things like 2FA and MFA?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a good place to be. If you ever see the option, if you're on, your websites with GoDaddy, turn on the 2FA. If you're doing banking, anything you're doing is 2FA. There's free utilities. I use Authy, but there's Google's got one, Microsoft's got one. That one-time code, that one-time password.
Two-factor authentication, is that 2FA?
2FA, yes. Yes. That's correct. Yeah. And multi-factor as well. You can do other stuff, but 2FA is really good because actually, technically, if someone's got a hold of your password, they can't do much with it. They'll need that code. And we've all got smartphones by the looks of things, so you can use a 2FA app on your phones. There's some nice 2FA. There's some multi-factor stuff that's out now that you could build in for your customers on your website, where they get a push message to their phone. I don't know if you've used things like TransferWise. It's got a good example of that, where you just say, "Hey, it is me." Okay.
You all have had experience on this with Xero. We had to set up, it's got another app that you have to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, as a whole.
You understand what we mean by two-factor authentication? Yeah, okay.
It's another factor. So if someone gets your password, there's another factor that you need, which is that code. It's a 6-digit code, and it's time synced. So every 30 seconds, or every 30 seconds it changes, but it's valid for about a minute, I think. And the key thing about that is, by the way, there is not so much now, but I'm a little bit older, so in my day we had things like time drift. Sometimes it will get slightly out of sync. You might have to re-establish 2FA. I haven't seen it so often these days. I think things have improved, but we did used to get a little bit out of sync, but it works fantastic well now. So obviously the judge had 2FA, so that was obviously a good thing to know at the time. That wasn't a problem. We've just finished an investigation for a company that they do a lot of shipping with the Korean company, and the Korean company sent them a message asking them to change their bank details. Now, one of the key things here is, and this will happen to you guys at some point, I would have thought, and obviously can't tell the future, but you can send money to your friends already and get their spelling of their name wrong at the bank, right? So you can call it James Jr. or something, and the payment still goes through. So the banks actually more often than not the banks may accept a transfer just to the account number. So even if it's a company, so what happens is they will set up another bank account, but they'll use the same company name. Does that make sense? So you're still sending it to the warehouse group, right? But But the warehouse group, they may set up a bank account with under a different name called the warehouse groups or the shop house or whatever. But the account number is different. And what they were doing is they were doing a thing called business email compromise, which we saw on a little bit earlier. Someone sends out a link, and then they've got access to that machine. Okay. So there's a thing called cookie stealing, where you basically you click on a link, and you don't know it, but their website's been infected by something, and they've got a thing called cross-site scripting. And by just clicking on the link on that website, the cookie, the authentication cookie, so when you go to a website and you keep coming back and it lets you in and it doesn't make you log in, like Facebook just lets you come back in again, right? You go on the page and you can go to where you were. Well, it's checking the cookie. The server's saying, have you logged in? And we can steal, the bad guys can steal those cookies and use them for other things. And it could be that they can get access to your email, or they can get access to other stuff, or they can send out an email thinking it's you, and then the other person at the other end, so you could have tens of thousands of dollars of merchandise that you're paying a vendor for it, and someone sent out an email, and it's so convincing, and we've seen some really good ones, that you do not know the difference. The mail, the conversation, even the slang that you're using you don't know it, and they've copied you in, and you're responding, but someone's got access to that mailbox, and you could transfer tens of thousands of dollars to the bad guys, and you won't even know it. They'll even confirm that it's been received and it's all good and the shipment's on its way, but there's no shipment.
Can they also change the email address that it looks like it's coming from, and then if you actually click on it, you see it's just a bunch of random?
Yeah. So what's common is so you could have, say, for example, accounts at westlakeboys.co.nz, right?
Yeah.
So what they do is they register something called, say, for example, they'll call it accounts.westlakeboys.co.nz is the username, so it's an email name, and then @mail.com, right?
Yeah.
So you're kind of looking at it going like, yeah, that's about right, and you don't know, but you don't realise they've just registered another name, or they'll copy one of the bad guys into the message. So when you hit reply all, because there's a whole bunch of people involved in a shipping transaction, right? You will be replying back to the bad guys, and you won't know it, and they can reply back in that thread and tell you stuff. And law firms are guilty of this as well. They just don't talk about it, because you have a situation where when that happens to an organisation, and it could happen to your business at some point, you're embarrassed because you don't want your customers to know that you got in that situation in the first place, because they think that you're protecting their data, and they want to know that you're doing the right thing. And so two things I can recommend is always pick up the phone to the number that you've got on file, not just because I don't know if you remember that it's more like IP phones these days, but you can call somebody and hang up the phone, right? You can call somebody, ask them to hang up the phone, and when they go to the other phone in the house, if it's not IP phones, so it's not the new technology, the phone's still connected. Does that make sense? You remember when you're probably not, if you go to some older homes and some older places that don't have the new systems, you can make a phone call, so you can receive a phone call, say, the bank, but hang up the phone, walk to another room and pick the phone up, and they're still connected.
Oh,
So they say, call us back if you're not sure. So you look the number up on the internet and you pick the phone up. And I mean, you don't really listen to a dial tone all the time anymore. And you phone the number, and then you pick it up and some other guys go, hi, I'm Bank of America, or whatever it happens to be. And you don't know that it's the same call. So that has happened, and it does happen every now and again. But just go back to the original. Any time that an account number has changed, you've got to make sure that you go back to the contact details that you have on file. Don't do any changes over email, and agree on, you can even have these multi-factor authentication 2FA numbers that you can agree with the other end if you set them up correctly. And they've got to give you a code to prove that they are who they say they are. But the links that people are going to at the moment, and the success rate is so high that it's worth doing, and they'll learn your business. I mean, I've got one guy, I was looking at the conversation, this guy totally got, I mean, it's a shame he was one of the bad guys, because he would have been a really good guy to have in there. He knew everything about his business, like all the detail, when they were shipping, who was on holiday. One of the guys, don't put your CFO's photo and title on the founder's page or whatever on the website, because he'll be targeted by some phishing attack. And so, just be careful of the information that you share. Careful who hears a conversation when you're talking about anything around finances. And if something happens to you where it wasn't something that you would normally see as part of your normal routine, and it was a bit unexpected, just verify it. This whole trust but verify thing. So if someone just approaches you or talks to you about something or tells you something's changed, just verify it. You should go on guard at that point and just say, hey, I'm fine with what you're telling me, but I'm going to get it checked out. It's a really good step, because it will mean that you might save yourself. It might make or break some companies. When you send a 40-foot container full of products, that's probably your biggest commitment in the early stages of a business, even a 20-foot container. And to be misled or have that money go to another criminal organisation, it could just, you might say, I've had enough, and you might have lost a really good opportunity. It was nothing you did. Someone just got in the way of you guys just doing what you enjoy doing. This is just a slide to tell you why people want to do it. Look, competitive advantage, obviously. They might want to take you out of the market, and understanding your cost and negotiations. They want to understand how you get by and how you make money. You might have some factory deal that you've got somewhere that you've got from somewhere somehow. They can get in and find out how that works for you. One thing I will say that was on a previous slide was the Sony hack. For example, all those years ago, is contract negotiations with actors and agencies and everything else were all in the document dumps that were sent. There's the dark web where you can go and find stuff. And the dark web, they could go and find the fact that there were terabytes of information in there. So the thousands of gigabytes of information were in this part of the dark web, which people went through. But they learned how the contract negotiations were going on with Sony. So some people that potentially had a pretty average contract could see how somebody that was good at contract negotiations could get a better deal. So to see it from an intellectual property point of view as well, you might have done something really clever to actually get you to where you are, and then someone actually has information, has those documents, so they could use it to their advantage. Okay, so in the Kaseya one, one of the things about Kaseya I think was quite important is, especially for the schools, some schools had that problem because, and to try not to get in the situation, sometimes a company that's helping you out, like it could be payroll, it could be something, they're trying to help you out and trying to make things better, they want to give you a computer or get access so that they can kind of give you support. And they don't do their systems particularly very well, whereas you do your systems as well as you can, and you follow all the right rules and you do everything you can, but you've let a third party or another company come in and install something when that could potentially lead to problems. Security by design, security by default is one of the things that we kind of, as an industry and a company, we go on about. If you can get ahead of when you design something and do the security at the beginning, it will be a little bit more expensive because it's going to take more time, but you save in the long run. You can start securing stuff at the beginning. There's a lot of principles that you can follow. There's a lot of frameworks that you can follow. And it will mean that when you design something, and you've got rules that you set out when you've got a software developer, and you say, when you go and negotiate your deal, when you're building the website, just say, look, we want to do security by design and security by default. They should be able to respond and say, right, here's how we're going to take care of that for you. If you haven't, you can just Google that, and there's some really good examples in the areas that you guys should be working in.
So if you're an absolute novice,
Yeah.
like me, if I was to start a business and I go to someone who's going to create my website,
Yeah.
I say, can we get security by design built now?
Yeah, these principles.
What do you,
Yeah, these are principles. So we want you guys to, rather than just say, okay, we'll build it nice and cheap, and we won't put any security in day one, and then it's up to you guys to go in the background and try and pull it all together. This is where you say, we're going to use two-factor authentication. Okay, we're going to make sure that everything's updated. So if you've got the option to turn on updates, update it. We're going to get some testing done. So we're going to get security testing done to make sure that someone can't break the applications and the software day one. Just a little bit about ransomware, which talked about Korean one already. One of the things about ransomware, it's so business email compromise, it's quite successful, right? So I could potentially get one of my guys to send you an email at some point in the next week, and it'd be so compelling you probably want to click on it. And I'll make sure it passes all the checks, so all the stuff that Microsoft and Google and everyone else does, I'll make sure it goes through and it makes it through, because it'll be something that they've never seen before. So if someone really wants to get you to click on stuff and to do stuff, it is quite difficult, but you can just say, look, I don't deal with these people anyway, or that domain doesn't look right, or something like that. So all that kind of regular stuff. But one of the things about business email thing, first of all, yeah, look for email headers if bad. If you get attachments, like, you know, please click on this attachment, invoice it, or something you're not expecting, just delete the message. You know, and you've got systems. If you want to get an invoice from a supplier, I mean, if the invoice says something like HTML, that's just going to take you on to a link that's going to have this thing I was describing when you steal the cookies, the cross-site scripting or something. They'll take you onto a website that potentially could cause you some problems. And then lastly, ransomware, the success rates, the whole thing with ransomware is they have things called, what used to happen is, a long time ago, you had someone that would break into someone's network, see they've got something of value, and then try and get you to sort of pay to get your encrypted data back. So, but it's all changed now. So there's a whole affiliate market, just like you would do in building your own business. You've got affiliates. You want people to bring deals to you. You know, your leads and sales and stuff. So the bad guys, the ransomware and the ransomware games, they have an affiliate network also. So you've got to compete with that. And unfortunately, these guys might get $500 they break into, say, your business. They'll say, look, and then they'll go, I think we make some money out of this. So here's $500, so you can carry on and keep funded and cause all these problems. And then they're in for a percentage of the actual ransom payer. So there's a great business. You can even do like a Dragon's Den, Shark Tank type pitch to them in the dark web and tell them what your idea is. I say, I think I can roll a tool that's going to really blow people away. It's going to save so much time and effort, and we can get so many more victims, and it might get funding. So I think one of the key things here is the affiliate network does make it a lot more widespread. I think one of the key things here is having plenty of backups is the key. Is the 3-2-1 rule, and you have your primary backups and 2 other backups. You have, that's your 3. The 2 was the 2 different types of media, so don't back it up on the same thing that might have the same problem, like because it might be a distant crash or whatever. And the 1 rule is to make sure that your backups are offline. And I'm saying it's simple as make sure it's disconnected from the thing, but also next time you go and have dinner at your sister's or your parents' house or whatever, take one of your discs and say, can you hang on to this? One of your backups. So if you lose everything, at least you've got something. I mean, your house might burn down as well. I'm not saying that'd be a great thing, but something like, you know, the 3-2-1 rule is something that's all over the internet. They'll explain it absolutely. And the 1 is offline, because when we do our security testing, we go straight for the backups, and the bad guys do as well, and they want to encrypt the backups. So once you sit there and go, I don't care because I'm going to restore from a backup, and you realise, oops, they've got my backups as well, which is really quite horrible for people. And one other thing is leakware. So just because you've got a backup doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get yourself in trouble. Now, in Europe, you've got a thing called GDPR, which is the General Data Protection Regulation, where there are fines if you get breached or if you lose customer data, and there's like, depending on what it is, it could be 20 million euros or 4% of your turnover. So you build a nice big business and then you get a GDPR fine. That's never going to be a good day. But you've also got responsibilities. If you've got UK customers using your system, that's citizen data out of the EU, you're also on the hook for it. You know, just because you're in New Zealand, that doesn't mean anything. For New Zealand customers, fine, but if you're selling into the UK market or Europe, more so Europe. And the thing about leakware is, just because you have a backup and you can restore and tell the bad guys that, you know, you're not going to pay the fine, they can leak to your customers, because obviously know who they are, that you've had a breach. And that's not good for business. And good logistics companies, for example, they just go somewhere else. So that's the thing. And the one other thing that's not on that slide, which I'll finish with, is if you do have a breach or you do have something like that happen to you, and you know you've obviously got ransomware attack and whatever else happens, the first 24 hours is really important. If you look at all the companies that have not done particularly well, they haven't communicated to the media and put their hand up and said, look, you know, this is what's happened within the first 24 hours. With GDPR, you've got an obligation for 72 hours anyway. But the first 24 hours, how you communicate with your customers that you've had something happen is quite important, because you can come out of it looking really good if you really want to. And there are things which you can look on the internet for as incident response planning. Plan for what might happen at some point, and incident response planning will mean that you've got a plan in place if you do get a situation where you lose access to your systems. They're my contact details. Feel free to drop me a note if you've got any questions. And if you've got any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
Scary.
With a system, say you do get hacked, and you want to protect your client's data, could you purge the system in order to
Good question.
protect it?
Yeah, so one of the best things you can do to protect your data is delete it. There are some companies that give the staff a day off every year, and it's called Data Deletion Day. And they want you to delete the data. For example, when we finish a project and the client pays us for it, we actually don't own those documents anymore, right? They've paid for them. So we shouldn't be hanging on to that data. So purging stuff, absolutely. Archiving it, encrypting it. Purging is the best option. If you don't, and you'll see lots of advice for this, if you don't need to keep records or data for any reason at all, then don't put yourself in a situation where you could potentially lose that data to somebody and then having to pay a ransom, when in fact it's stuff that you're just worried about your customers finding out that you've not done a particularly good job of protecting their data. But yeah, delete it. If you don't have to keep it, delete it. Absolutely.
And if you do get hacked, do you need to change the system? Because I don't know if it's true or not, but can hackers make a backdoor into your system? So would you need to change the whole thing in order to get rid of that? Or?
Well, there's two problems. So if you look at Maersk, which is a shipping line, and it was all over the news a few years ago, you don't really know the integrity of what you've got. So you're going to have to go to New Zealand, probably have to go to something like PV Tech, and only 100 laptops. And there are, Maersk have people driving around in taxis, buying as many laptops as they can get their hands on. And one of the problems is you can have backdoors, absolutely. We do a thing called a compromise assessment, where we assess what happened, and we'll be able to work out what happened and what the behaviour was and what they were trying to do. But that takes a while, right? And you're running a business that could be time sensitive, right? So you don't have the option of, and there could be that forensics or the police involved, where they want to know what happened, because there could be quite a lot of things that might have happened after that, and they want you to keep the systems intact so that they can send the forensic team in. So you've lost your systems. Now, if you're in a cloud computing environment, you can spin up more compute, but you're still going to get a bill for the stuff that you're running. So you get a bigger cloud bill, but you start to come online again. That's why when you suddenly see, I'm just going to say healthcare provider, but sometimes when someone gets into your system, they could be in there for 6 to 8 to 9 months before they do anything. So you do start restoring stuff, but you kind of restore them back onto the system. You see what I mean? So you don't know when they were there. Now there's companies like Veeam, for example, they have a solution where they can say, I know what it is, and I know what caused it, and you can exclude that from being sent, it's restored, and they've got quite a good solution like that. But you're going to have to get to that stage first, and you don't know what it is. When you just lose access and then the network's slow, or you're starting with like, okay, is there an outage, or is Spark or Vodafone or Orcon or whatever, are they having problems? And you could be 24 hours into trying to figure out what's going on before you've got someone that's kind of go. And the logs, and just so you know, when we do testing, so there was a red teaming slide there just a bit earlier, but red teaming is when we attack a customer, sort of a friendly attack. They know we're going to do it within a certain time frame, but we try and break into the network while they're using it and see if their team that's called the blue team, which is the security operations people, can they see us? Can they detect us? So it's like a real life, and it's in the military, they have a red teaming and blue teaming exercise. And we clean up after ourselves, just like the bad guys do. You won't even know we're there. So we get in, we go for the logs, remove. So that's why it's important that you've got certain things happening and monitoring, and so the guys should spot us coming in. But we did one for a company in Australia recently where the guys saw something happening, and it was us, and they contacted me and said, "Is that you guys?" And I was like, so they saw one thing, but they couldn't work out if it was us or not. And it was just one event, but that was the last time they saw us, and we were in there for like a few weeks. And the reason why we could tell what the threshold was to be detected, if that makes sense. So we just stayed under that. It took longer because we had to go low and slow, but we got everything we needed and we left.
Pretty
So,
cool, right?
yeah.
It's terrifying.
That's awesome.
Will, did you have a question?
Yeah, how good are like Shopify and Squarespace at like protecting like the data on there and stuff?
So Shopify, so there's a thing called a CVE, right? It's a CVE database, I think MITRE, there's a whole lot of them. But if you Google CVE and you just type CVE space Shopify, you will see there's a lot of vulnerabilities that Shopify's had. Now, having said that, because, and it's like WordPress, it's how you implement it, first of all. You can either get someone that runs it as a service for you and you're assuming that they've got it right, but software is always going to have vulnerabilities, right? So, and because Shopify is quite widely used, there's a lot more people out there that are going to find those vulnerabilities and report them than if it's some guy, Joey Joe, that's in, say, Milford, who's built a shopping cart thing for you that not many people use, and you've got like a couple of loyal customers. Unless he pays for someone like my company to come in, which isn't cheap, to do the security testing, you're better off the big old community out there saying, like, that's unusual, or how does someone manage to play around with discounts and give 99% off on a t-shirt? Then you're going like, yeah, well, that's a good point. So someone's worked out that there was something in the code that, because of a new update, it was introduced, and that can be a problem. But look, Shopify, the big names, as long as you can see that there's stuff like you will see with the CVE thing, you will see that there's a vulnerability and it was reported by this person and they fixed it. It's companies where they don't want to invest the time in fixing it, and they want to put their head in the sand and say, yeah, okay, we'll roll it up in our next major release. Well, that's not going to work. So you'll find that companies like Spotify will have a security policy on their website, and they will explain how they take security seriously and what they do to do that. And there are other companies that just don't want to know, and you may not know. I mean, you could be compromised already and you won't know. And then you'll notice something happens, and it might just be through billing, or you're doing reconciliation and you're going, that doesn't make any sense. And then you find something, and it could be you could be the company that's, or the entity that's reporting that, and then they get it fixed. But big names, normally the responsibility is not too bad, but you'll see that there's probably, let's say in the next month, there'll be another Shopify vulnerability, and it may be something that you don't use. And that's not fair to say that, because it could be in the next year or 2 years. It's just, but you will see there is a regular flow of vulnerabilities. You know, look at Lassen, for example, that Confluence, they've had a load of vulnerabilities that have affected a lot of customers. You would have seen that Log4j was a big one that came out that affected a lot of people. Apache, Struts, all these people get affected by it. But the communities are huge, so there's a lot of eyes on seeing that there might be a vulnerability, and there's a lot of people that are involved.
If we get, say, breached and we notice that something's going weird, like we see we've had like purchases made that are 99% off, what do we, obviously we can inform our customers, but what do we do? If we've got small budgets and things like that, what's our best first step to start solving the problem?
Yeah, so you need to have some sort of monitoring. So when you're doing the development, you need to build those test cases in. So when you finish your, I think I'm answering the question right, but so you build those test cases in to say that can I modify stuff like that. So what you do is when you finish and you're just about to go live, you've got to go in with you or your testing team or some people and build scenarios, or get a company like mine to actually try and run all those scenarios through and see if there's anything that you can break. But yeah, you would have to do some sort of limiting. We have things like rate limiting. So once you see an unusually high number of transactions, so if people are buying t-shirts and you only ever get a maximum of 5 shirts ever, then maybe just set that limit in the back end and then just say, you know, until you're confident, or just go and test stuff. You can normally, if it's Shopify, you can normally just Google some testing. If you want to be doing discounts, can I update them? Can I mess around with the numbers? So, for example, it's not the actual. It's not me saying that it's 99% off and typing 99 on the screen. It's if you look at the top of the screen, there's like this URL. There's a message that's going off to the server. And we're modifying that. We've got like a bit of software that sits in the middle. And as the traffic comes past, we're taking the 5% and making it 99%. Or making sure that the server side validates it. So whatever you change on your on the web browser, the server checks it as well. Does a quick check and goes, it's been modified. Server side validation is quite key.
So if you have a problem, you're most likely to go to your developer if you develop the website, or if it's a big company, contact support.
Yeah, ask them at some point. So when you finish the project, so when it's developed, make sure there's a budget in there for some testing, right? And then ask them, you know, just do some. First, we'll do some vulnerability testing to make sure it's all kind of up to date and there's no known vulnerabilities. And then the next thing you need to do is you've got to do some basic testing to make sure that you can't mess around with stuff. And they will say, yeah, okay, we'll do that. Look, if you're on a really limited budget, get up and running, and then like with Shopify, just make sure you're following all the threads and actually making sure that it's all developed a certain way.
But yeah, you miss something and it happens, what do you do? What's that next step? Do you go back to your developer and say, you need to go back in and make sure they can't do this, or
that's called the remediation.
Paralyze your business.
Yeah, you need to go back to him and say, look, that's happened. He needs to give you a description of why it happened, and he needs to fix it. So he will do a thing called a patch, and then he will update that. So if you're running on, say, your software, you're using something like GitLab or GitHub, he'll push out a new version, and it will have those fixes in it.
And most developers have that, I don't know, I guess that's an after-sales service, isn't it? Is that you'd have that developer on a retainer, or do you just pay that developer as and when the problem?
When you do the project, so at the end of it, I want to get some testing. What are you going to test? You're going to give me some vulnerability assessment, and ask him how can he guarantee the work. He needs to do some basic testing, and then as you grow as a business and you get more customers connected, do some proper penetration testing. I know there's going to be budget constraints. If you can afford it, get somebody like our company where we'll rip it apart and put some test cases in there that you've never seen before. But limit the damage,
Have you had some testing done?
Not to that extent, just area testing. So I'm sure I'll talk to them about it.
And there are some free online tools that will give you the first low-hanging fruit to say how have they done, like using the wrong type of certificate or the wrong type of encryption, or there'll be a whole lot of stuff that you could have done, which we call low-hanging fruit, that the free online tools will reveal for you, and then you go in more in depth. But they should be cutting code for multiple customers, so they should have already been told that that wasn't a good idea on this customer, so you're getting someone with some experience.
Yeah.
But if you haven't, then you need to hand them up for it.
If you don't mind me asking, how much does a company like yours cost to rip it apart? For the big clients.
Yeah, it's sort of low end, like really low end would be about 8K. You're sort of in the 12 to 20K range. And the reason why, it could be 30K, I mean, we're doing something at the moment that's way more than that. So on Cyber Citadel, it's got a YouTube channel, and in the YouTube channel we kind of break down how we get to the cost. So I've got to get guys that have got different skills. So if you say that the guys in the back row on my pen testing team, right, one of those guys is going to be the guy that does the initial access, gets in, and he knows how to break in, bypass the firewall or whatever else. The next guy along, we hit something called CrowdStrike. Now CrowdStrike's trying to protect the network, and it's a bit of software that's going to stop people getting, from the computer into the network. So we roll something to bypass. That's his responsibility. Then we get to the next level. I need someone to do privilege escalation. So I need to get from being just a standard user to somebody that's got some rights that can cause some damage. Like, I'm not going to say God status, but something like it's admin status, right? So admin, global admin. So that's the privilege escalation. That's the next person along. And then we've suddenly got someone that's doing a mobile application testing. It's a different skill. So I'm my fourth employee along, and then the mobile stuff's done, and then the last, I've got your name, sorry about that, guys, but the guy on the far right, he can be doing the API testing. But they're all very specialised skills. So what happens is some companies will just have a one guy that kind of sits across all those skills, and they'll be a lot cheaper for sure. But they will hit a roadblock. So I mean, one of my guys is in the top 25 in the world for security testing, and depending on which magazine you read or article you read, it could be a lot lower. But the guys are absolutely, that's all they do. They live and breathe it. So if you're building your businesses and you've got all the passion in the world for doing that, these guys get up in the morning and that's all they want to think about is, and once you're in a system, it's not like, you watch Ocean's 11, for example, right? It's not that you get all the way to the thing and then you get a phone call from your mum and she says, dinner's ready. You don't put everything down and head off because you're in the middle of something. You've just gone past a whole bunch of lasers and stuff, right? So that could be 36 hours of work that you start and you stay in there and you get everything you want. So you've got to want that type of job, if that makes sense, because you're literally stuck in there trying to break something. And we don't even know. It could be that. Well, I get phone calls from the guys that say, "Look, this network is pretty well hardened, but we're confident we'll find something." And then like on day 4, halfway through day 4 of a day 5 test, we have a breakthrough, and at least we get everything. But this one computer joined the network. Someone just popped in, put the computer down, and it wasn't up to date. And then that one computer was used to take over everything. But if you don't have that patience and you don't do things in the right order, and you're sticking around for that one event, you may just hand a report and saying, didn't find much. But stuff's still there. So it's how you use that time.
It's not as expensive as I was thinking. Now I've got this vision of, at your office, there's all these people sitting in rooms with like multiple computer screens in the dark, it's kind of, beavering away and there's data. Is that what it looks like?
That sort of looks like that, but those numbers I was quoting for a certain amount of time, right? So there are some customers that want, say, 30 days of testing, or we're doing some testing at the moment, some in the US. But that's a lot more expensive project, but there's quite a lot more people in on the project. But if something's going to last 10 days, that's sort of.
And are all your guys local, or are you, obviously it's clearly something that you can work, is it something you work from anywhere? Is your team sort of international, or you work everywhere, or?
Yeah, I wish, and it sounds a bit, I'm not trying to come across arrogant, but if you think about if you're going to start a Formula 1 team, right, and you're going to build a New Zealand car, but you want to win, and maybe that the driver comes from somewhere else, you don't know. So you build this car, and it's amazing with New Zealand tech and all the carbon fibre and stuff, but you realise that to win against everybody else, you need to hire or give this guy, he could be Japanese or somewhere else in the world, the job as the driver. So we know that the bypassing some of the endpoints, some of the CrowdStrikes and some of the Microsoft stuff, and getting past stuff that would normally be a kind of like a brick wall. There's only certain people that can do that, and I've got to fit in with where they want to live, if that makes sense. And they could be in the UK, they could be in the Middle East, they could be in the US. So we do 24-hour testing because we want to have the advantage of, first of all, a lot of times the client it's always dragging on a bit the time. Does that make sense? So your project is supposed to be finishing on Thursday, but it's a week delayed. So when you kind of give it to us, you're kind of out of time. You want to go live. So we do 24-hour testing. So we've got our own software portal, which we design ourselves, where everyone checks in. We've got the work. There's no duplication going on, and you know where everything is. And if there's something that we call it a critical, if we find something and it's 2 o'clock in the morning on, say, a Sunday morning, that's notifying somebody, because that's bad news. Because some of these systems are live systems that we work on.
Any other questions? Well, we've got Jonathan here. This just terrifies me, this whole cybersecurity side.
Do your people work on the bad side as well?
No.
Do they used to?
No.
Did they used to be on the
No, but they do get obviously people contact them, and you make pretty good offers, you know, to because you're just, some of them are publicly visible people, right? But what I will say is, I mean, if you look at things like DDoS attacks, right, distributed denial of service attacks, you know, you've got someone at home that's a gamer who wants to be able to buy the latest, you know, avatar or whatever you're buying, you know, or you need some currency to go to the next level or whatever. It could be that temptation, just from a gaming perspective, somebody that would have been on the right side of it, that would have potentially been a really good white hat hacker, has gone to the wrong side just to get a bit of money because he's this keen gamer, and then you end up in the wrong thing, and you end up the wrong side of things. But no, it's the way it works is you have from our side, you have a security person, like the main person, like the security lead, and they will have this circle of people that they have worked with and they exchange information with. So, you know, you've got your football teams and your stuff, and you've got all the other stuff you do. You'll have the key moves and stuff that you do as a team, and you won't talk to anybody else about it because you don't want them to use it to. That's something you know, and that's your intellectual property. So, no, and we've got our own systems in place to do our own checks to make sure that they're on the. Because don't forget, some customers actually want us to have more access than we should have. So if I've got someone that's got a tainted past, then that's not going to be a good starting point.
What do you do for your personal protection? So CEO of Cyber Protection.
Yeah, so for example, when I go to security conferences, I don't use Wi-Fi at all. I just went to one just recently. I didn't even use my Apple Watch, and there's no reason why I shouldn't have taken my Apple Watch. But I basically I try not to give too much of my. So this is information like, for example, that's our office number, but you can have my email address. You can just find that if you just go onto my website and you can look at the white papers that we've written. But from me personally, is if there's something that's unexpected that I didn't plan, or someone's contacting me out of the blue about something, I just treat it as higher risk. I make sure all my systems are up to date. All of my systems have two-factor authentication. I have a password manager. We have all my passwords, so I have one vault password, which is a big old password, and every website that I connect to, I have my own unique, big, long password. And you know this from cloud services is people reuse passwords. So from my own protection is if you've got access to, say, Canva, for example, they got breached a few years ago, and everyone's Canva passwords ended up on the dark web. That would be. So if I was using my Canva password for logging into my Office 365 where I've got my client documents, then that would be bad news. So my login for my Office 365, my Canva, I don't use Canva, but everything else, I use a password manager and separate passwords for all the different websites. I encrypt all my data, and I have offline, I have a 3-2-1 rule for backups. And even, I we recorded it, someone tried to scam me last Wednesday. I recorded it for the benefit of the team. But it was a convincing, so they called me and said there was some unusual traffic coming from our network. The lady was from Spark, and she said to me, so I asked a question, so you just say, hey look, she goes, I'm in Auckland, I go, so what's the weather like? And she's like, they'll just go straight on to the next question, so you know it's not like, because they're on a script, so they know, you know that if you ask them a question and they can't handle it, and if there's big gaps when you ask them stuff that they're not used to, they're sometimes tapping in somebody else for some help. But obviously don't go onto the web page that they ask, but if anyone calls you out of the blue and says they're from Spark and everything else, just, yeah, good time to hang up. I can make a phone call and say that I'm your mobile number. I can send a text from your mobile number. There's nothing to stop me doing that. There's fake caller apps all over the app stores. So trust but verify. Anytime you see something you think might be unusual, it's not, if someone's asking you to change something that's already working okay, the bank says to you, we've had a lot of, we've had a lot of spamming and crime and what we call cybercrime, so we need you to reset your password. No one's ever going to ask you to do that. And I think one of the key things is get some endpoint protection, so get some like ESET or the Microsoft stuff, get that running so when there's a known bad link, so if someone sees that someone clicks on a link and it's bad, these systems report worldwide that was a bad link. So if someone's grandma in the Hokitika clicks on something you've never seen before, it might go into Sandbox, they go, that's not good. So the rest of the network knows that that is a spam link. So when you click on it in Auckland, when you get up maybe 15 minutes later, it's already known to be bad news. So having something on the endpoint for sure, some antivirus or something like that is always good. And yeah, anytime it comes down to banking or changing something that would be like transferring money or doing anything else, make sure you've got another way of verifying it, and do not do it by email. And just to recap on that, look, when I started out with computers, they had this thing called SMTP, which we still use today, and it looks like a telex if you go behind the scenes. It's really kind of old technology, and there's been upgraded versions of it, and we use it today. And if you send me a message at some point, you're going to be using some of that technology. But when they designed it, the people at the university where they built it, they all knew each other. There was only 22 people in that department, or whatever it was. So there wasn't any consideration of security, because it's like all the people in this room today, we developed an email system at the university, and we're not even thinking about security, because if someone does something, you're just going to walk up and say, why'd you do that? And then it became a big worldwide sort of smash hit that everybody's using it, but the underlying principles of how it works and how it communicates, there wasn't a lot of security by design and security by default that went into, because we didn't really care.
Interesting. All right. Another burning. Oh, Martin, last one.
I just had a question. There are like actual things that you can use that generate passwords for you and keep you safe for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never used them before because I'd rather just write them down or just keep them in my memory. But are they safe?
So, very, very good question. So, look, at the end of the day, it's software, right? And right at the beginning of the presentation, we were talking about software vulnerabilities, right? So why wouldn't there be software vulnerabilities in these password managers? And the answer is there are. So you can make a decision on, if it's a big deal company, like 1Password as an example with a 1, they just have so many people testing and securing stuff. And I'm not recommending them at all. I use another bit of software from another company, and I've used it for over 10 years now, and it's really secure, and I make sure it's kept up to date. But there are, look, KeyPass, for example, 5 or 6 years ago, or 7 years ago, there was a utility, so you'd go to someone's computer, grab their database, and run a bit of software that the hackers use called KeyPass, and it would list out all the passwords. So, but that was fixed, and they get better and better at it. Writing it on a post-it note is absolutely fine if you're at home, to just have something else rather than just reusing the same password again and again. But obviously if you stick it on your screen, then when someone comes past with a video camera, and you've seen it in the news stations, every time they go into the newsroom, there's always passwords stuck onto the screens and everyone ends up hacking the newsroom. Even the police, they had this MySQL database in Australia, and they did the first day that they did the launch of the service, they did the whole operations centre, and the guy had the main password stuck on the screen. So they obviously thought that was quite entertaining to bring it down. Password manager is good. Just read the reviews. If you're going to go for something, go for one of the bigger ones. The one I like is because my one's not synced across the internet, so I use one that just uses local Wi-Fi or local network to sync. You can go over the internet, but I have the option not to. But go with one of the big ones that have had a good reputation, that have been in business for long enough that they know better to come up with stuff. And like I say, I'm not a big fan of KeePass or there's another free one that you can use. And yeah, but like I say, there's some really good reviews on them. Like one of them, some of them got family deals, so you can just buy it as part of a family, get like a 5 package thing and pay a one year fee, and it syncs across your iPhone, your Android, your Windows, and your Mac computer. So that's definitely worth doing, and they're not expensive.
Wow, goodness me. I'm really quite pleased now I'm not in your shoes. Just adds another layer of complexities. Thanks, Jonathan. I learned a huge amount. I'm a complete novice. These guys know a lot more than I do, and I'm sure that you have today as well. And if you haven't, and you are a novice like me, I'm sure Jonathan would be happy to answer the odd question that might come through.
Yeah, I'd love to hear how you guys are going, and any challenges or any questions. Make a note of my email address. Feel free to contact me. I'm more than happy to give you some advice and help you guys out. I was at one of the earlier events that they had down at Snails, and I was quite interested to see how you guys were progressing, and it looks good. It's good to see some good ideas coming through.
Yeah. Toby, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you on behalf of everyone here coming in today. I think we all learned a lot and opened our minds up to things we wouldn't even consider before. So thanks for that. And
Thank you.